Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the Practical Microservices stream. Meet up tomorrow. Let me pull that up real quick. I don't know. Oh, my goodness. What? Try it. Why do you have to log in to see? All right, let's try this. Utah Microservices Meetup. And go. Here we go. Here it is. We're going to go over the hidden bug again in a more condensed format than how we did it here on the stream. So don't want to miss that. We do stream them. So if you look at the invite here, we have a Zoom URL there. If you want to attend via Zoom, need you to RSVP to the meetup so that when we see you in the waiting room, we know to let you in. We got Zoom bombed that one time. And then thanks to LiveView Technologies for hosting us again. With that, let's just dive into what we're doing today, which is going to do some more tests to make sure we sent an email, to make sure that it is an email, and then also to make sure that a blank password being sent doesn't get through. We would want that to say, hey, that needs to have a minimum of 8 characters. So before I forget that, so it is email presence test. We also need an email format test, like so. And so we had a file already in that folder for making sure that what was sent is an email. So we are going to work on that. I'm going to copy this boilerplate. We'll still want our controls here. We'd still want the messaging so that we can check to see what was written. This, though, won't be the password too short. This will be our not an email test. And in that case, when we get a register command, we could go to our controls here, which would be in lib controls. I thought it was in controls. Is it not? They put them in app controls? That doesn't sound... No, where did it go? Oh, I see. We did a video tutorials application namespace there. Right, okay. Elib. Video tutorials application controls. What am I missing here? Oh, register users. Okay, there's another layer of namespacing there. Lib, video tutorials, applications, register users, controls, and this one we're looking at email. So identity client controls email, fine, but we also want not an email module, not an email, and this would have a self.example, which would return, I don't know, not an email, because that's not an email. All right, we'll take it. And so then that is the control that we would want to use. Not quite, though, because that's going to be at the controls layer. We would want that to be under that. Okay, so email, not an email, like so. Okay, that gives us that. And password, I think this one is going to be too short. But in this case, we want a valid password because we want to make sure that it can fail just from the email not working out. So we would send up our parameters. We expect an unprocessable entity, and the response, don't know what Rails is going to put there, so we'll just leave that as it is for now and change that when we know what it should look like. And the rest of all this is the same. We would expect 0 messages to be written. So let's go ahead and run our tests. I think it will fail at the unprocessable entity part. Yep, because it accepted what we sent it, and that's incorrect. That's fine, because I mean, that's literally what we're doing right now, so... I would be more worried if it had passed. There we go. All right. So we are saying that it validates the email. And I believe there is a format key that we can use. I'm remembering. Let's just close a bunch of these. If they're important, we'll open them up again. So Rails validations format. Format. Here we go. I'm curious if they have any guidance on how to validate the format of an email. Okay, so it looks like that is if you wanted to validate the format of an email in multiple different places, you could pull this out as a different validator class that you could then use down here in your models. I don't think we're going to get that far. So it's mostly this regular expression that I'm after right now. So regular expression for email addresses. Interesting. Okay, so that particular regular expression won't match every single email address in existence. That's fine. You know what? We're just going to grab this. I would say if you are going to validate email addresses by use of a regular expression, do more research than just, hey, I saw this in the Rails docs, I'm going to use that. For our purposes, that's sufficient. So we would want to say something like that. I want to take this presence off of here, though, right now, because we're not checking that right now. What did we get? Not an email test. So this failed at line 8. No, that doesn't seem right. What line is that at? Can we tell? 23. Neat. Okay. So that tells us what the message actually is. Email is invalid. That's the text that we'll get. We could customize that, but that's good enough for what we're doing. So if we do that, now the test passes. It passes. Great. That's what we wanted. So now what I want to do is take this test that we have right here. So test integration, register users, register, and let's do blank email test. And then we'll open it. Test integration, register users, register, blank email test. Let's come back to our Notion doc though to say we just did the email format test. So I'll cross that one off and we're going to do the email presence test. And we are in the blank email test. Oh, what? I can drag that up and down. Didn't know that. That's pretty cool. Not sure why I would use that, but hey, it's there. So blank email. And in this case, I don't think that requires a control. because the identity component in our controls don't define what an empty string is, and that's what we're testing, is sending up nothing. So I'm not sure what our validation message is going to be. If it's going to be that I mean, the empty string clearly doesn't match that format, so this whole test may actually pass. Assuming I didn't bork something syntactically. Test register command is already defined. Oh, I don't think I saved that file. There we go. Okay, yeah, that passed. So it was saying the email was invalid, but what happens if we add the presence true option here? Now, does it fail with a different reason? It does. And it's saying that it can't be blank and that it's invalid. Do we really need to specifically call out? Like, if you submit a blank email address and the error tells you your email address isn't valid, do we need to specifically say it was because it can't be blank? I think that I don't love the is invalid. It's like, well, why is it invalid? I prefer something more like that isn't an email address. And I don't think we necessarily need to refer people to the RFC or whatever where email addresses were defined. But I wonder if the right thing to do here is to be like, message that is not an email address. Which, going back to what that one author was saying about the nature of the message, they may type in a valid email address that doesn't pass. So maybe it's like something like, we don't accept that as a valid email address, even though it might be, but whatever. We're just going to change this to is not an email address like so. This is totally not internationalized, but this is not a Rails stream. However, let's do one thing. And that is make this a bit more readable. Oh man, so the JavaScript developer in me would want to format this like so. But I guess that's more Ruby-like, if that's what Vim is telling me. Would we do the same thing here? All right, I would pull this back to there. Or would I? I'm not sure. I'll just leave it like that. Let me run that to make sure it passes now. Uh-oh, what'd we get? Email is not an email address. Right. Email is not an email address. There we go. Now that should pass. Did I typo something wrong? Yeah. Oh, I see. This isn't this test failing. It is the previous one. So if we go test integration, register users, register not an email address, then you should say is not an email address, like so. And now I think this test will pass. Great, test passed. Let's move on. That was our email presence test. And now we have the blank password test. So, excuse me. Let's copy that to be blank password test. And then we'll open test automate. No. Integration, register users, register blank password test. There we go. So you become blank password. In this case, we do want an example of an email address, but the password this time is what's going to be blank. And I'm guessing that the error is going to be the same as what we have here. So I'm just going to grab that line and put it in. And I think the test should pass. They did. Cool. That's it. That's all the tests I wanted to put in there. So we're going to do a commit for the first time. Pretty exciting. We don't have any DS store nonsense in there, do we? I'm not sure if this is our initial commit, but users can register. Let's push that up. That might be a good time to remind the world where you can find the code for all of this. We have some repositories there on GitLab under the Porting Video Tutorials to Eventide project. So go there if you want to see all the code that we're doing. I did for the first time. I'm really excited about this. But the other day I said, hey, there's all this stuff I need to do off camera. I actually did the stuff. So the user credentials aggregator, view data component, as I would like to call it now, has been updated. It's pushed up. It works now. It has the, instead of calling the identity ID user ID, that has been corrected. And yeah, that's where we are. So with that in place, we've finished all of these. I'm going to remove this next here before I fall prey to it. So we're moving on to the identity component, which we've been working on. It's not like nothing's ever been done with it. So our Docker Compose we updated. Oh, that's something else I did was in the Docker Composes for the various components. I updated them to use. Sorry, I was up very late last night because of a pharmacy issue. Took a family member to get a prescription, dropped off the prescription at 9. It's a 24-hour pharmacy. And they said it would take 2 hours to fill it. And 4 hours later, hadn't heard from them. So I'm yawning a bit today. Anyway, so let's see. MessageDB is updated to version 1.3 to reflect changes in MessageDB. Try to keep the Docker image consistent with the current version of MessageDB, and then I just have it use whatever the latest Postgres is whenever I get around to updating that. That is the support update schedule for that Docker image. So these are just changes. The other things are changes to, well, to conform to my style guide, which is to use double quotes all the time. The rest of it was just changes to make it work for the Rails application. So let's go ahead and add these things, git commit or git commit. Why don't I alias that one? Let's see, client works for registration. That's our message. So we'll push that up. now it's been going on for a decade almost. No, at least a decade. Anyway, okay, so what are we after here? Let's close that. Since we're going to be working in here, let's go ahead and reinstall our gems just in case there were any changes. Good to be on the latest things. Continuous integration doesn't mean just running stuff on a server somewhere. The idea is whatever you integrate with, be it your dependencies, other code at your company, continuously integrate with them so that you don't find yourself in a position where it's like, we're so many major versions behind, we can't possibly update. Like that happened to GitHub. They had made so many changes to Rails itself, monkey patching it in the Rails 2 era, that when Rails 3 came out, they couldn't upgrade to it. And so they hired a team to just backport necessary fixes. I've got to assume they've changed that at this point. But that was the understanding in the industry. So yeah, continuously integrate. Don't batch that up. Don't wait until you have some critical thing going on. And yeah, I'm going to take a note. That's a good little rant to extract there. So how far into the stream are we? We're about 26:11 in. Rant about continuous integration. More of a short. Okay, so with this identity component, we haven't implemented any of it. So, well, it's not true. We haven't implemented any. But if we go to the command handlers, notice how that looks a whole lot like the code that the generator made. Why? Because it is exactly the code that the generator made. So let us implement it. And I still don't have a diagram of this, but we have the old JavaScript code to work from. So let's see what this component did. It first handles the register command, producing a registered event. Now it doesn't do anything to prevent against duplicate email addresses. The way we handle that in the book, and this is one of the things I do want to change, one of the first things we'll go back and fix once this is all ported. So if you had two people, excuse me. Oh, the check for duplicate IDs is actually handled by querying read data, which is eventually consistent. Hang on a sec. I'm gonna grab a copy of Practical Microservices here to see how much I wish I had worded it differently in the book. Here we go. Starting on page 95, there's a section ensuring uniqueness of email addresses. Keep in mind, it's actually on page 96. Keep in mind that this check for a duplicate email used eventually consistent view data. Records show up in user credentials after we've written a register command, after the identity component coming up on page 110 picks up that command and issues a registered event, and after the aggregator will write on page 120 picks up that event and writes it to the user credentials view data. We'll justify validating unique emails this way on page 99. Okay, so on page 99, while you are successfully recording user registration requests, we still haven't justified the decision to use the view data to validate that the emails supplied during registration aren't duplicates. A direct contradiction of what we said on page 21 when first discussing the pieces of our architecture. It's pretty graph in there. When making decisions like this, it's important to ask a series of questions because the truth is there is no single correct for all systems answer. I don't know that I... In the general case, yes, you can't say that for every decision a system must make, there is a correct answer. For this one, though, I think I got it wrong in the book. Anyway, there are always trade-offs, but if you're asking the right questions, you can get answers that work for your needs. That's what we went with here. So consider, how likely is the thing that you're trying to prevent? How bad is it if the thing you're trying to prevent happens? Whose constraint is it anyway? What does correct means? For the first question, we go back to the map of a microservices-based system. Validation has to live in one of those places. We use the application and view data to validate that email addresses used in registration haven't been used before by issuing a simple query. This honored the unidirectional flow of data through the system and did not violate any of the rules of what components are. But Ethan, you may say, isn't the view data eventually consistent? You might be concerned that a situation like the following could arise. User 1 sends a registration request with trixie@example.com. System checks user credentials table and lets user 1's request through, writing the corresponding register command. User 2 sends a registration request with trixie@example.com. System checks user credentials table and lets user 2's request through, writing the corresponding register command. So both of these requests came in close enough together that our query of the user credentials table showed that it wasn't there. It's kind of like in the concurrency issue where you can project and both record that you haven't done the work yet. I mean, it's the same issue. Anyway, the identity component picks up user 1's command, processing it, and writing the registered event. Does the same thing for user 2's command. The as of yet unwritten aggregator processes user 1's event, inserting a row into user credentials, and then it sees the registered event with a duplicate email address, packs up shop, and moves to the mountains in a remote area. Turns out aggregators are not capable of doing that. You might be, but aggregators aren't, or view data components, as I'm trying to call them. Those points are completely accurate, but here's the thing. When we say eventually consistent, and this really matters. I've heard this objection a lot to the architecture that how could we do anything in an eventually consistent manner? I mean, newsflash, as Greg Young says it, you're already doing things in an eventually consistent manner. I don't remember the talk he said it in, but when you send a GET request to some website and it renders a page for you, like it queries its database and then renders the response and shows it to you. If while it was rendering that and sending you the response, someone came in with a request that changed the state of that, you're now looking at stale data. It's not like the server can reach back through the pipes of the internet, pull back your request, be like, just kidding, we need to update this before we send it to you, right? It's already eventually consistent. And so what I think people get hung up on is this. We don't mean, when we say eventually consistent, we don't mean that when the request comes in, someone prints it out, ties it to a carrier pigeon, and sends the pigeon off to an out-of-state location where another worker will copy down the request and commit it to system state. We're talking about a pretty small window here, on the order of milliseconds. Honestly, how likely is it that these two requests will come in as close together as needed for this to be an issue? And I think in this case, not very, in large part because, I mean, despite all the bravado in the book, there aren't a lot of people using the video tutorials website. Then I got to talk about one of my favorite podcasts, Econ Talk, and mathematician and big thinker on risk and probability, Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He said, in the presence of the probability of ruin, you will be ruined. So surely if these two events get written, there's no recovery from that, right? No, it ends up not being that because when we do the aggregation, we can just handle it and mark when user is needing to update their password. So yeah, okay, I'm going to put this away now. That's how we're currently handling it. And I would not do it that way anymore. We have the ability to validate the uniqueness of something, and what it would involve just at a high level is putting a stream around the thing that we need to make sure is unique. So we don't have streams that represent email addresses. We could. The registration process could try to reserve, like if we had Ethan at suchsoftware.com as the identifier of a stream, like that's valid. We used UUIDs for everything for the most part, but there's no rule that says we have to. It's a convention is all it is, and it's a useful convention because UUIDs can be generated randomly with a low probability of collision. Well, email addresses are unique. What's wrong with using that as an identifier? Right to be forgotten legislation is why. I mean, it's probably not a good idea to store people's email addresses, but we could store a UUID v5 that's derived from the email address and call that the identifier. Given a hash, we don't have a way to recover the email address, but given the email address, we absolutely can get back to the same hash. I mean, that's how password authentication works. Unless you're using a really old website that you shouldn't be using. Hate that word. I think you're putting your security at risk if you use a website that stores your password in plain text. And anyway, I mean, passwords themselves aren't all that brilliant, are they? This is quite the rant. What are we talking about? Oh my gosh, I really forgot where we were going with this. Right, stream. So if we had a stream that represented an email address and we said, you know what, these can never be released. Once it's used, it's forever used. We could just use a reservation pattern for that. So if you wrote a register command and part of that registration process was to consume the email address, you could just do a write to that stream with an expected version of -1 or a write.initial. And if that works, then that means that no one's used that email address before. If it doesn't work, then it means that someone has used and now you have a duplicate email address. So let's go ahead and reject that. That is what the solution, excuse me. 1 second, be right back. That is what the solution is going to involve, but there's a little more design around the event flow to make that work, because we would want to make sure that everything else in the registration is valid before consuming an email address. Otherwise, that one would be forever lost. And then we also would need to do kind of like we did with naming the video, where if we're going to submit this command, this intent, this request to the identity component, and now it has a process that involves validating that the email address in question hasn't already been consumed, we'll need to be able to surface errors. And so there will be events and view data construction to reflect the status of that operation, just like there was when we go to name a video. We absolutely would not want the application to write an event claiming the email address and then following that up with something else, because those aren't atomic. And it will happen eventually that your endpoint consumes the email address and then crashes before, or is redeployed or something before it's able to write the command to finish out the rest of that registration flow. And then now that user's just hosed without intervention by your team. Well, anyway, so back to our sheep. Revenons à nos moutons. My French accent was never brilliant. It has gotten worse in the 11 years since I returned home. Anyway, okay, so register command produces registered events. This error here was because I was using errors for control flow. It worked. It's not how they're supposed to be used, but it did work. And I really do like these pipelines quite a bit. I don't love the context variable. Anyway, okay, so then having produced the registered event, we then send an email is what we want to do. So we handle our own registered event by sending a send command to the send email component. And then we are handling the event from the send email component to write hey, we sent the registration email already, which gives us the ability to not write that command a second time if it has already been sent. So we have 3 request handlers to write. Let's get cracking on it with the few minutes that we have here. For what it's worth, I don't think I'm ever going to record an audiobook version of Practical Microservices. So if that reading wasn't dramatic enough for you, if it didn't, you're like, I couldn't listen to that. Well, don't worry. You don't have to. Read it in your own voice. Let's see here. What am I trying to do? Go to test. Oh, I'm in the JavaScript code. That's why none of the directories there were matching what I was expecting. Got a little worried. Let's see here. So test, not interactive. We want automated commands. So we have our tests for the client commands, but now we're coming in and we're saying handle commands, and we are going to handle the register command. And first step, producing a registered event. Great. Let's open that file. That was not that file. this is that file. Okay, so require relative. We're in the register directory up to handle commands, up to automated, where we will find automated init. And I'm going to run that to make sure I did that correctly. So nice to be in a sane testing environment again. Yes, I'm going to use that. I don't like the way Rails handles that. It was nasty and brutish, just like Hobbes's view of the world. So we're in handle commands. Within handle commands, we are in the register command. And within the register command, we are looking to write a registered event. And our handler is going to be handlers commands.new. Let's make sure that runs. It does. We're done. Test passes. Ship it. No. We need a register command to do this. And to get one, we would go to our controls, to commands, to register to get an example. I don't know if we have such a control. I don't think we do. Don't. And thus we get the name error. Great. Let's add it. Commands register.rb. Oh, this is nice. Coming back to this flow. It's so, oh boy, what did I just do? We'll fix that in post-prod. You're like, what post-prod? This is a live stream. Let's see here. Commands, where'd you go? Right there. Nope. Nope, that's not it. Let's nope right out of that file. We want this one. Okay, so module. We are in the identity component. We are within controls. Within controls, we are in the commands, and we are doing the register control. So, and then we should have a def self.example, and now test passes again. It didn't. Oh, right. We have to add it to the control loader, which would be right here. Commands and register, like so. There we go. We passed. Now we do our preconditions. There's information, data points that this puppy needs to have for this to even be valid. First would be, well, I don't know what they would be yet because we don't have anything pulling them into existence. So we're not going to do them. So let's go straight to handler and pass it our command. And this should now fail because that's nil. And it's going to be like, hey, I can't tell what type of a message that is. So now we need to fine. We'll give you an actual message to work with, and we'll say register equals messages commands register dot build. And the simplest line of code that would make that pass would actually be just invoking like so. Cool, we are going again. So then we would say, hey, we expect this handler to write a message. Fair. So let's get access to the message writer. We are going to say that the registered event that we wrote is equal to writer dot one message. And I think we get I don't remember off the top of my head what writer.one message takes. So let's go to a place where we have done this before. The composite component will have an example of it. Test automated, handle commands, initiated. What is it? You get the event, which makes sense. So, which we can see right here. We're basically repeating this block, but I'm going to type it so that I finally remember this. So find me one message for which the following holds true. Message.instance of messages events registered. And I have an extra end in there. We pass. So that means that we have actually defined that message here before. That is a control. If the control passes though, that means that we do have the event defined already. Okay, good. What did I just delete? Okay, and this assertion is probably where we will call it for today. So we want to make sure that the registered event is written. And we would say that registered, actually we don't want to assert that, we want to refute that registered is nil. Which gets us to a failing test, which is now pulling our controller into existence. So that is where we will pick it up next time. Is we can just write the handle register, do register like so. I am not going to, I'll keep it around. Basically it's that line there that I want to keep. But some things that are interesting. I haven't been using the clock in the book example, so we'll be pulling that out. In fact, why don't we just do that right now? There's nothing pulling that into existence. I mean, technically this other stuff isn't. One thing to do before we forget is to receive that set. You know what? We'll do it later when we're not rushing and making mistakes. All right, cool. Hey, thanks for coming today. Got some juicy rants out of that we'll have to extract and put up on YouTube. But that said, have a lovely day as always, and happy coding.